Fear tells me I can't go do something creative with my wife. I can't give her a hug. She may reject me.
It's actually not something wrong with you. It's not that you're broken. It's not that there's anything bad about you. It's just a normal physiological response, but it's on overdrive. So we got to turn down the alarm system.
Oh, I get so excited every time I hear that. Mostly for you. That's Francis and Dr. Camilla Pekka from A Growing Space. Their 10-week program will literally transform your heart, mind, body, soul, spirit, the entire thing. I am so confident in these guys. They are a partner for Series 3. All you need to do to learn more is text the word LEARN to 623-202-4553. That's in the show notes as well. Trust me when I tell you that if you're going to go with them, you should be ready because they're going to help you get it done.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Okay, so my name's Keri, and I'm 62 years old.
Keri, what story are you here to share today?
The story I'm here to tell is that there's times in our lives when we feel like things are so broken that they can't be fixed, and a sense of overwhelm, and we want to quit, and it's not true.
Who do you hope hears this?
Anyone who feels that way, parents, young people who maybe feel like their parents have given up on them, parents of every age, regardless of what stage they're at, that redemption is there for the asking and the taking and the giving.
Yeah.
And so I hope they can hear those stories.
I am beyond excited that our next guest is on this podcast. I never say this, Frank, but grab a pen and paper. You are going to get a million nuggets throughout this next little bit of time, because the woman that we've chosen to spend a little bit of time with, I met, we were thinking maybe close to a decade ago, at a parenting class that you're going to hear a little bit about in this podcast that she teaches called Love and Logic. Dr. Frank Bavak, I want to welcome you to our podcast. I'm really excited that you're here too, sir.
Aren't you always excited that I'm here?
Yeah, every single time. But more than anything.
But especially today.
Because of our guest, because of the fact that, Frank's, you don't know this about him, Keri, but he's engaged. He's getting married, right?
Congratulations.
Some would say there's a sequence of things that usually follows that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that Keri is truly an expert on is something that can benefit you, me, and everybody else today. So I'm just friggin' excited that we're going to jump down this big rabbit hole. We better get right to it.
Yeah.
Keri, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about your childhood. But I want to start here in this series 3 with a little bit more of the present moment. How are you now? Despite all of the stuff, despite all the troubles, the tribulations, how are you right now?
Yeah. So I would say I'm living my best life right now. I wake up each day and I get to look at my calendar and see who I get to see and work with. I'm a life coach. I specialize in relationships. So I work with all aspects of relationships, whether they're families, individuals, marriages, business relationships. And so I get really excited about how that's going to unfold and how we can help things go right in those relationships. So I get really excited about helping things go right. Yeah. And I've been doing that for going on my 27th year.
Look at this.
And so a lot of people get burned out in this work, but I find it invigorating and full of joy, and because there's always new things to learn. I have 16 grandchildren, and 9 of them live right here close to me within 5 minutes of me. And so throughout my week, I get to spend wonderful time with them. And I feel so privileged to have them invite me into their lives every day. Yeah.
Let me ask you, Frank, I got to bring in the psychologist right away. What she's talking about here is the stuff that shows up on Pinterest boards. She's talking about the kind of things that She's talking about what people dream about, isn't she?
Well, I'm gonna say, like, you're talking about a Pinterest board. I'm like, if I had to put a headline on that Pinterest board, I think it would be like, "My life doesn't suck. Satisfied with career, satisfied with family." Like those are two of the big three. I mean, the third one being like health. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that too. That's amazing. That's what everybody wants.
So how did we get there? That's what we're here to carve out today, Keri. We're here to figure out, like, how did we get to, the moment where place. Yeah, because it wasn't always that easy, was it?
So truly not. I mean, I would have to say that's something that most of my clients, one of the things I love about coaching is that we are encouraged to share our journey. And so there's, and I think that's part of what's been the success of my experience in coaching, is that we are encouraged to share how we got from where we were to where we are. And so I'm sixth of 9 in a family of 9 children. I was raised in a pretty abusive environment, every kind of abuse you can talk about. I personally experienced in my life growing up. Drugs and alcohol. I have 4 alcoholic addict brothers and sisters. I was sexually abused part of my life. For 5 years, I was involved in a satanic ritualistic cult. By the time I was 17, I'd moved 14 times.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so I went to 4 grade schools, 3 junior highs, and 2 high schools.
Wow.
So a lot of transition in my life. I was groomed by a family friend 10 years older than me who took hold of me when I graduated high school and held me captive for 4 months and continually raped me. So a very different life than most people exist. And so I was able to escape from that. I had a full ride scholarship to college in music and drama, and was able to escape from him and went to college. Truly by the grace of God, he did not recapture me. And I was able to, I met my husband there. I was 17 years old. And I got married when I was 18. So statistically, I've beat the odds, you could say.
Well, I was just wondering, so you talk about the volatility of your childhood, and I'm wondering, in these times where, you're seemingly gone for 4 months, are people looking for you? Like, I mean, so what's happening?
Because he was a family friend. So you have to know enough about my childhood. My dad was extremely controlling, very highly abusive. So I had been cultivated to acquiesce to the control he had over me. And so even though it would look from the outside that I could leave the environment, I didn't believe I could. I just didn't think I could. He had been an intelligence officer for the Army. He was extremely bright. He was a black belt in karate. And he really did, in my mind, control every movement. It wasn't until he left to go do a job in Hawaii that I knew he was physically gone and I could leave. That there was going to be a period of time that he couldn't just come back, that I could make my escape.
There's this phrase that comes up on our podcast sometimes of like children having to survive their childhood. Is that a statement that you feel like resonates with you?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I discovered later when I did get professional help was that, lying was a part of living. When bruises and things would appear on us, you really had a very quick way of explaining how those things occurred, what was happening, why you missed school, or what happened, because that came to you as quickly as the truth did, because it was a way to exist, to live, to survive. In college, when I met my husband, he was a really unique individual who was the first man I had met that wasn't interested in me in a sexual way. And that was really attractive to me. I broke up with him a whole bunch. I if you read my journal, I'd say, I broke up with Hal again. I told him I'm just not going to do his laundry anymore. We're not together anymore. And so he's just too good for me. I can't have anything to do with him. He's so amazing. He would never want me anyway, because of course I just thought I was a piece of trash. Yeah. And so he was just always going to be way too good for me. Then I'd see him the next day or two and he'd say, so are we going to go get something to eat? As far as he knew, we had never broken up. That must have happened. We dated for a whole year.
Every once in a while, it's a really good thing that men don't listen.
Absolutely. I mean, he was the captain of the baseball team, and he was really, he had such a good self-concept, really good self-value and worth, and he saw me in a way I didn't see myself. And it was the first time I'd experienced that. And it invited me to see myself differently. And because we had this time together, it provided the chance for me to begin to examine me in a different way. And because we didn't have a sexual relationship at all, and he didn't push for it, our religious values, I was examining my religion for the first time as an adult, completely separate and apart from how I had been raised. Because I wasn't really sure at that point if there really was a God.
Yeah. Well, don't you think, Dr. Frank, that there's so much, she's unbelievable, which is why she's on our podcast now. But I mean, the amount of rewiring and relearning and, new belief systems that she had to manage is almost insurmountable.
Yeah. Well, and how many times have you and I come across a guest who has a certain kind of childhood that most of us sitting here and hearing about or looking at, we know that is sort of not the norm, right? Or not the right thing for a child to be going through. But so many of our guests have said something to the effect of, it took me X number of years before I even realized, something felt off, but I didn't realize that not everybody went through what I went through, right? And so I'm wondering for you, when were your first sort of aha moments that not everybody had to go through the things that you were going through? Or did you somehow figure it out really early on?
Yeah. So early on, I remember going to some friend's house and realizing that, our Christmases weren't like theirs, and seeing that, okay, so this is really different. What I've heard about what Santa Claus isn't what their Santa Claus is. And understanding that we were really quite poor. So that was the first kind of thing. Then I remember sharing with this one friend, just flippantly, probably around maybe 6, saying, "Oh, I got in so much trouble." And she said, "You did?" I says, "Yeah, like when you get the belt." And I started describing graphically. I mean, when the buckle hits you and the thing gets in your leg. And I started to show her my leg. And the look on her face was so horrifying. I remember that then this was remember I told you, you learn to lie to survive?
Yeah.
I said, "I'm just kidding. I got a stick in my leg." That never happened. She goes, "Oh, okay. You were just kidding?" And I said, "Yes. I mean, this is why I got a drama scholarship."
Right.
Because you became incredible actors, great storytellers early on. Yeah. And I remember thinking as I went home, okay, you can't ever, ever tell anyone about those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just learned that, okay, so that doesn't happen there. Where else doesn't that happen? And then you become more hypervigilant about watching other people's lives. We weren't allowed to have friends over. We didn't have birthday parties. And you hear things at school about other people's lives, and you begin to put 2 and 2 together. Their lives are not our lives. What happens to them doesn't happen to us. So, you began to realize that things are different. And we moved so much that you didn't make really close friends.
And you were always moving. And so, there's a certain settling time and you're busy and there's basics that happen. And so you're able to just kind of sweep all these things under the rug and act like they're not happening, I guess. Did you ever have moments growing up where you would get angry at your family and just be like, what is wrong? Why do we keep doing this?
Well, when you have a father that is full of rage and physical anger, there's not a lot of room for your own. And I had a brother who my dad, there's a set of twins just older than me. And the brother just older than me was one that I became his whipping post. So he was my dad's whipping post and I was his. So when they say, shit runs downhill, yeah.
And it kind of brings us closer to, where I'd love to move next, which is, when people grow up this way, and we've talked about this 1,000 times on our podcast, but when children experience that level of trauma, it goes on their permanent record. It never goes away. And so that becomes the operating system that you use in everything that looks, tastes, and touch like it for the rest of your life, unless you lean into really doing something very different about it. And, my guess is you didn't lean into doing something really different about it right away. In fact, you started your own family. Were you pretty young when you started having kids?
Really young. So I got married at 18. I was engaged at 17, married at 18. I had my first baby 9 months, 2 weeks after I was married. So I was just 19. Had my fourth baby by the time I was 25. So 4 kids just in over 6 years. And,
how much of that old operating system was within you, or were you the kind of mom who was like, I'm going to change?
Oh, no, that was my mindset. No matter what, I'm not going to be like my dad, no matter what it takes. So I began to try and take some parenting classes. So one of my favorite stories is that I go into this parenting class because I'm already yelling at these little kids, and it's scaring me because I've spanked little kids already and I can tell I'm losing my temper and it's something I don't want to do. So I go to this parenting class that's called Know the Rules Before Playing the Game. And I'm like, I need this.
Yeah.
I need to know the rules. So I go and I'm listening to this gal. I'm probably, I think I've had my fourth baby. So let's call me 25 and she's 30. So I think she's way older than me. And she's talking about this is the most important rule you'll ever learn. So before you do anything, you're going to count to 10. When you're all angry and upset, slowly count. No, she says count to 10 and the anger will dissipate and you'll be in control. And I'm waiting for the rest of it. And I'm looking around and waiting for somebody to raise their hand and go, and...
Yeah, that sounds like a really good step one. What's step 2?
I raised my hand and I go, and then what? And she goes, well, then you'll be calm and you'll act rationally. And I couldn't help myself. I go, well, this is what would happen at my house. I'd go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. And I go, you better knock it off.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, oh, you need help, lady.
Yeah.
You need some serious help.
That's
what she did in front of the whole class.
Oh.
And I was just like, okay. And it confirmed to me that I was broken and likely there was no help for me.
Yeah.
And I'm getting emotional. And that's why I say for anyone who feels that way, don't give up.
Yeah.
And I was ready to give up. I was like, so I'm just screwed. I'm just going to be like my dad. Because the idea that I would escalate, I could just see my dad kicking my brother around our dining room table and all of us, the rest of us kids begging him to stop, trying to pull him off. And he wouldn't. So there's a double trauma. Not only have we been the recipient of it, but we couldn't stop the agony. emotionally and physically. And the idea that that would be my future, I thought, do I just leave them? Would they be better off with somebody else? And so I read books. I tried different things. I do remember vowing I wouldn't spank my kids again when my oldest were 6 and 4. And I was able to do that. I could walk away from the physical violence, but emotionally, I couldn't get it under control. So fast forward, when my daughter's about 10, my oldest, I remember reading in a journal, I would say black, she would say white. I mean, our conflict was so
off the charts.
Awful. Just,
yeah.
And she had some pretty horrible things happen to her. When she was that old, she was chased down by some boys in her school and molested in her schoolyard. Mm. And the principal said to me, boys will be boys. Let's not make a big deal out of this. Yeah, fortunately, I worked for a law firm at the time and had to have my bosses give them a call.
Yeah.
In order for any action to be taken.
Oh, there's so much wrong with that. And I hear everything you just said. I want you to know that,
So it just escalated from there. She, by the time she was 12, she started experimenting with drugs and alcohol. 16, running away from home. And that's when we ended up and from 12 to 16, we had her in and out of counselors. I mean, I did everything I knew how. I mean, I bribed her, I begged her, I pleaded with her, I grounded her. I don't know how many times I grounded her for life. She and I would get in yelling matches, and Hal was more of a passive. He was raised with parents who weren't anything like mine. His dad was a very patient man. They weren't physically or emotionally violent. It was really God's intervention that we ended up together.
I feel the same way about Nickley's family. They are very much that way. If you don't mind, I'm just going to pause you for a second because, Frank, I want to bring you in. She's used this phrase double trauma a couple of times since we've been talking so far. Maybe it's obvious what it means, but would you speak to it from the lens that you have and why that's going to be harder than maybe a single trauma?
We've maybe heard the phrase like vicarious trauma, right? We're experiencing the trauma essentially of someone else, but we're witnessing it. In your case, there's kind of the added layer of like, and I couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
On top of obviously being the direct recipient of different kinds of abuse, right? So there's just all these layers and all these things that are telling you over and over and over again, like you're not good enough.
Mm-hmm. So when she finally, when she ran away from home, and there was this period when she was 16 that things were escalating at such a rate, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And it was almost like she was doing everything she could to make it as bad as possible. And she came home just before she ran away. She came home one day from school and, threw her backpack down. And, she and I got in this verbal altercation. I was like, what do you think you're doing? You need to go put that away. And she goes, oh my gosh, you treat me like a slave. And I'm like, look, you need to get your chores done. You need to get your stuff done. And she's like, oh, I said, look, if you think you can find some family that's going to let you just go live there for free and act like it's a hotel, why don't you go live with them? And she goes, fine, I will. She grabs her stuff and she convinced her dad to co-sign on a car for her. And ever since that had happened a couple of months before, she had just basically come and gone as she wanted to. It was like an FU to us. And she did. She left. And that was that. Her friends called me to tell me where she was, but then she really just disappeared. And I found out this was before cell phones. So, we had no way of tracking her, things like that. This was 100 years ago. I remember how old I am.
10 or 100, whatever.
Right.
Right.
I found out through one of her friends that actually she and her cousin were planning to go to Vegas and hook up with her cousin's stepmom, who was a stripper in Vegas, and she'd already gotten them jobs. And so Hal called me from work and said, hey, Jim from work just told me about this place called Lifeline in North Salt Lake, where his daughter just graduated from, and it saved their life. So I called him. This was 3 days after she'd been gone, about 3 days. We couldn't find her. And I called him and told him what was going on. And they said, this is how you can report her as a runaway. Here's how and she showed up that night, totally wasted. and told us where she was going to be the next day. And so I called the cops. They showed up the next day, arrested her, and we brought her in handcuffs there. Yeah, she was really happy with this.
I can imagine she was over the moon about it. It is so important to note right now in this conversation that the relationship you have with your daughter now could be summed up with maybe a different kind of word, right?
She lives 3 minutes away from me. She just called me before this call and said, "Hey, it's George's birthday. We want to go celebrate it. Do you think you and Dad come and George is her fiance, come and hang out with us? Because, we can't imagine anybody else would rather spend his birthday."
It's a different kind of relationship. And so I mention that because, there's so many times during our podcast where we talk about these moments, right, Frank, where somebody does something and they just can't get over it. They just can't get over that they did the thing their dad or their mom did. And so they stay stuck, man. And then these kids have to keep growing up with this nightmare. But here is this transitional character in Keri who said, screw that. There's a different way to do this. Yeah. And I'm going to figure it out. How do we, here's a $1 million question, Frank. How do you help people who don't have the gusto to want to do what Keri did? Like, how do you plug them in and give them like a little bit of her anecdote to get them started?
To get somebody to help themselves is hard, right? If they don't want to, it is real hard, if not impossible. To get somebody to break a cycle and to want to break that, to feel like they can, is even harder than some other hole that they have fallen in on their own, right? We're talking about somebody dug a hole for you to start that you had to climb, through no fault of your own, you had to choose to climb out of. Some people get themselves in their own hole and then maybe don't get themselves out. In this instance, you started 10 feet below everybody else. You had to climb 10 feet just to kind of get, back to neutral. If somebody doesn't want to do it, it's never going to happen.
People have asked me so many times if my daughter's ever shared with me where was the defining moments. Because she didn't do anything for the first 4 months in treatment. And this is a treatment facility that only accepted families. That means you can't drop your kid off. So we had to go. And after the first 6 weeks, my husband's company quit working in the United States. And so he had to find a new job, and he was transferred to Arizona. So he and the other 3 kids left Arizona, and she and I stayed for the rest of the year. So she and I were in treatment for a whole year. He would come back and forth, and at times the other girls would come and join for group therapy. So our family was in treatment for the year.
Wow.
The year. So one of the things that I can tell my clients is I don't ever ask things of you I haven't done. Personally. The other part is that they were just getting ready to recommend transfer for her to a residential treatment facility when a staffer broke protocol and gave all my MIs, and an MI is a moral inventory, that we had to write MIs every day. So I'm doing the program. I'm writing my MIs every day. So by 4 months, you can imagine how many MIs that is, right? And she starts reading all my MIs. And the staffer tells me that after about 60 of them, she starts crying. This is the first emotional release they've seen out of her. And she goes, "These are real, aren't they?" And she says, "Yeah." She says, "Okay." And she says, "What does that mean?" She says, "So she's not faking it." And she began to realize if I was going to really work, that she was going to maybe do it. Because she just thought I was going to do time like her. And so through this whole program, I'm being put through love and logic training. With with the alcoholic addicts that we had in our own family, I'd probably been through maybe 15 treatment facilities by then. So I knew AA upside down backwards already. So I was already running a group for new parent intake. So I was doing that. So in one of those groups right after this, I share for the first time about my own sexual abuse. And our family therapist hears the story. And she asked me if I would share that with my daughter, because I haven't talked about my own history with my kids. And she says, it's really critical, I think, for you to share this with your daughter. I thought, okay. So I come into treatment and talk to her about that. And she just begins to sob. And she tells me what has happened about those 2 months. Remember, I tell you, things are starting to really escalate. She'd been gang raped.
What's apparent to me is that in order to fix these situations, parents really need to get humble.
Yeah.
And they need to lay down their sword instead of using it to point the direction in which they want their kids to move and go. And if there's anything that I hope at least people come away from this last few minutes, it's just that. It's that you said, here's my sword. I'm in this for real.
What was shared with me then was a friend I had been in the program a lot longer than me. She gave me a book called Bonds That Make Us Free by Terry Warner. And when I began to read it, first I was really angry because it was pretty crucifying to me. I realized all this time that my daughter had been a problem in my life. She was basically just a problem. She was in the way. You know, she wouldn't do the things I wanted. She wouldn't perform the way I needed her to. She wouldn't, have the results the way I needed her to in order for me to be okay. Once I got clarity around how everything had been about me solving my own hurt, me getting, driving my own agenda, I could see that once I began to see that I could see her hurts were as important as mine. Her needs were as real as mine were. Her hopes, her dreams were as valid and real as mine. Not more, not less, but just honoring her humanity as much. Everything could shift. It took practice, right? Lots of practice. But it was a profound shift for me. And it began a journey of healing both ways. But with all of my family, my children, all of that, but also with those who had hurt me in the past. Because I could see their humanity.
You used a word earlier, work. None of what you're talking about is easy. No, making a decision to do something about it, first of all, that's hard in and of itself, but the decision alone, doesn't result in any change. I think a lot of people in a lot of areas miss out on a lot of opportunities because that opportunity is disguised as work. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so many times where people start to go down these paths, and a lot of times it'll get worse before it gets better. It gets harder before it gets easier. I talked about this with somebody recently. When you go to counseling, the first session or two usually feels pretty good, right? You feel good about your decision to be there. Mm-hmm. You feel excited about whatever change you're trying to make or whatever you're trying to move past. You're venting all of this initial information. And so there's a lot of positive that comes with that. Somewhere around session 3 and 4, and it starts to suck a little bit. Because one, I think sometimes you realize that once you unpack some stuff, you realize how much is there to actually fix, right?
Right.
And now you're realizing just how far you have to climb. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate part is a lot of people quit. Like if we're talking about therapy specifically, a lot of people quit therapy somewhere around session 3, 4, and 5, and then they will forever feel like therapy didn't work. It made me feel worse instead of better. They'll never go back, and they're going to tell other people that they shouldn't do it either because it made them worse instead of better. We know that if you kind of stay past that critical point and you put in the work, I mean, it's like going to the gym. If you've never been to the gym before and you go for the first time, you're going to feel real good about yourself the first time you go until you wake up the next morning and it's going to hurt. And if you stop at that moment and you're like, well, the gym made my body hurt, so that's dumb, I'm never going back, and you'll never go back. If you do it more and you get stronger mentally or physically, then it gets better, and you're glad you did it.
Right.
But so many people take that first step or 2, feel real good about themselves, take step 3, and they're like, F this sucks. Right. And they never keep pushing through.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because, and especially when I'm working with families and relationships, and they're just like, you know, I just don't see this resolving. I don't see it ever coming back, you know. And I said, remember, this is a long, you know, we're in this for the long term.
Yeah.
You know, you have to remember, relationships are long term.
Yeah.
And so it's like a marathon. You know, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I'd really love to run a marathon. That's one of my great achievements I want to achieve in life. And they've never exercised at all. Yeah. What kind of a plan would you lay out for them?
Yeah,
and you know, they're really logical. They can lay it out. And I said, that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So just think about it. You really want to have this to be something you can achieve, this wonderful, delicious relationship. But in terms of the work, when asked about it, I say the thing about the work is if you stay in it, you aren't as sore, just like the gym, right?
Yeah.
You aren't as sore. And there's this deliciousness that comes, these moments of great joy. I remember when we first dropped Nicole off that first night, she turned to me and she goes, I hate you so bad. I hope you die on the way home. I remember thinking, well, you're going to stay here till you're 21, so whatever.
Right.
I was that mad at her. But I remember one of the things you should know about how hard this was is she had just been given a music scholarship to the Princeton School of Music.
Wow.
And we took that away from her.
Mm.
She couldn't, when I asked if she could be, withdrawn for 2 weeks to attend because that's where you qualify for scholarship. Mm-hmm. They said she leaves, she doesn't come back. Wow. They knew how that process worked. And it took her a while to get past that. But I remember when she told me 5 years later, she and I were talking about treatment and what she'd learned from it and things like that. And she says, I didn't think you'd be able to do that, Mom. I just didn't think, both of our shared love of music, I just didn't think. And she says, I can't thank you enough. I had a plan. I knew if I could get there, you'd never see me again. Never. Thank you for having the courage to save my life.
Yeah. Well, I can vouch for the relationship now because you see it in person and it's clear what's happening there. So here's the question that I have because, our goal is to help people feel less alone, encourage them to talk about it. When you're going through something, having the conversation, having to use the difficult words with somebody is a very challenging obstacle. And it's the one that prevents people from maybe even talking about it or saying anything. So will you use your own relationship as an example? And will you say because clearly life keeps going on. There's still agitators and things that go up and down. And so when you and your daughter nowadays find yourself in a place where you're like, it's a little off for a sec. What do you guys do? What do you guys do to kind of put it right back where it needs to go?
Well,
You're welcome, Frank.
You do develop skills. I mean, the one nice thing is, she's getting her college degree in psychology. So she's got some good skills. And so if there's a misunderstanding, one of the things that in our our family dynamic is we've really learned and practiced to say, hey, let me see if I got that right. And we really practice mirroring. We go for clarity. I mean, that's probably one of our most commonly used skill sets. Did I hear that correctly? And that allows the person speaking to hear their words, to be able to reflect on them. Is that the way I really wanted to say that? Did I sound like that? Let me clarify. That wasn't what I meant. Right?
Yeah.
Or if it was, then I get to say, oh, let me think about that. Right? And I can, so even with my grandkids, you know, some of the things that I've shared with them around certain tools we use, like navigating with curiosity rather than going for accusations or assumptions. And we practice these skills really early on, right? And so that when misunderstandings and miscommunications, which are just human frailties, those things are going to happen common. Regularly, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, I had my little 9-year-old granddaughter come to me and she said, you know, Nana, those things work. And I said, which things? She says, you know, those communication things. I said, well, you want to tell me about them? She says, yeah. So my friend's telling me that I'm just wrong all the time. And I said, how did that work? And she said, I said to her, did you say I'm wrong all the time? Like every time? I just want to understand I heard that right. I said, what'd your friend say? Well, maybe not all the time. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Was I wrong just now? Yes. Okay. Maybe I was. And I said, okay. Well, I think part of it is that kids will naturally pick up the vernacular that they're around, right? So if there's kindness, compassion, forgiveness practiced regularly, that becomes their way of being. Just like that wasn't empathy, kindness, compassion wasn't my environment. Criticism, accusation, harshness, that's what I grew up with. So when I first was learning the skills and tools of love and logic and arbingers, empathy was extremely foreign to me. So I used a lot of sarcasm and criticism. I really had to learn what genuine empathy and compassion was because I didn't grow up with it at all. It was really foreign. You know, when I would first learn it in class, the kids I was practicing on in treatment, they'd go, no.
Not that.
They'd be straight up with me. I'd say, what do you mean? I'm saying, oh, that's so sad. They go, yeah, but you don't mean it. I'd be like, what do you mean I don't mean it? I didn't mean it. I didn't know how to mean it. Right. You know, I didn't know how to feel so bad for them. I was like, look, you made your bed. You should lie in it. Right? And so they'd be like, don't you feel bad that we made a mistake? Why you made it? So I really had to learn and get to a place. That's why Arbinger was so helpful for me, to really unpack for me how to gain a sense of, I knew how I could feel bad for myself. So then, oh, they're just like me. They're a human being just like me. So doing the healing around my own trauma allowed me to see their humanity.
That's really how we get it done, is to arrive at that moment.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, for sure. And then I want to ask you about forgiveness in motherhood and some of that stuff, please.
So one of the things that was really healing was learning how to take ownership of my own mistakes with my children, my husband, and then apologize and give space for and time for their own decision around forgiveness. Because I realized if I asked them to forgive me when they weren't ready, it placed a burden on them. So when I could own that I had hurt them, that I had created an environment that was hurtful and unhealthy, and that I realized I had, and I was genuinely sorry, and that I knew it would take time for them to forgive me if they chose to, because I was still working on forgiving my own dad, brother, all the junk that had gone on.
Of course.
I didn't want to place that. So I said I was sorry. So can you forgive me now? You know, the hypocrisy around that, right, was incredibly beneficial. And so that's one of the tenets that I really hold in the work that I do with clients, is to recognize it can be a burden to ask for that forgiveness when a person's not ready for it. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. And I know as a dad, you know, when I went through my dark days a couple of years ago, and I 100% was not giving the best version of myself to my kids and my wife and everybody else around me, right? For that matter, it was easy to get myself into a space of like, you know, you really screwed up as a dad. You really put some permanent marks on these guys like that. They're going to remember that the rest of their lives, and kind of sit in that darkness. And I had to get to a point where, like, I loved myself enough to forgive myself is kind of what I had to learn. I want to ask you the same question. How did you come to love yourself enough to forgive yourself for some of the stuff that you had done and ultimately set it down?
You know, I came to a place of, I think they worked in tandem. The more I saw the humanity in others, I could recognize it within myself. And then there was another ask I had to, in working with my own coach. She helped me identify that one of the ways I had attempted to protect myself was in the identity I had created, this victim identity, right? Throughout my lifetime, all the ways in which I had been victimized, right? So I called it a woundology. So I would go through life kind of nurturing, cultivating, and developing this identity of my victimhood. And as long as I held on to it, it was very difficult for me to forgive myself because this was my identity. But once I could see that this was just a portion of my life, that there was this whole other part of me, and that she was more and greater than these parts, and that she could love them and have compassion for them, just like I could for all the other people in my life, then I didn't need to hold on to this, you know, this kind of like a protective cage, if you will. And so I no longer went through life pushing forward with this woundology, you know, here's the way I want the world to see me. Because holding on to that kind of allowed me to justify almost any behavior. You know, if the world just sees me this way, anyone will feel bad for me.
Of course, they'd be like, they forget.
I mean, who wouldn't?
Will you speak to that a little bit, Frank? I'd just love to know your thoughts on what some of the stuff she's talking through.
I think the hardest thing is to see yourself. How many times do we talk to people that like they've denied their own reality? You talked early on about lying, right? Like lying, you learn to lie to others. I think some people, everybody kind of lies to others, but some people believe their own lies, right? And like, it all starts kind of first with, I guess, being honest and kind of seeing yourself first.
You know, letting go of the fear of being transparent with oneself, being whole and true, right? And of being able to love who you are. I mean, for me, it's that I'm God's design, and that's enough.
Yeah.
I think some people have this fear that if they look too closely at themselves, they won't like what they see.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think if we all look closely enough at ourselves, there will be pieces of ourselves that we wish were different or better or whatever. I guess our hope is overall, you know, at kind of the foundation of it, that we see ourselves as a good person. But yeah, it's a whole lot easier to never peek behind the curtain. That's
where discerning the lie is that somehow I'm not lovable or enough if I'm not perfection. That having weaknesses or flaws is then therefore I'm not going to be okay enough. And so when you can come to a place of that, see, I came to a realization that there were so many people I loved wholly that were imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to truly look myself in the mirror and say, then why? What's holding you back from loving your imperfect self?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a belief I had held from my childhood.
Yeah.
I was raised with so much conditional love around perfection and performance. Both my parents were perfectionists. So love was conditional around performance, around perfection, and breaking down that belief and letting it go was so freeing, and for my family as well.
Frank, I had a cool grandma. I don't know, you might have a cool grandma, but this Keri girl, this Keri is off the charts. And I just mean that with my whole heart, you know? I mean, I hope in 20, 30 years, I mean, you literally are, we talk about it all the time on our podcast. You are literally planting trees, the shade you will never see, Keri. You have done things for your family. I'm going to cry that are going to single-handedly transform the way they live their life for generations. Think about that. For generations, your impact and decision-making to be this transitional person in your life and for your family, that's incredible. That's superpower stuff right there. And I really do hope, you know, I thought about this when you were going to come on the podcast. I thought, you know, she's going to share some things. I wonder who, you know, in her family she's going to let hear this. And the answer is, I hope everybody can listen to this and think about, God, why am I getting so emotional? But just what you were able to overcome should be inspiration enough for everybody in that family of yours to overcome it. It certainly has been for me. So thank you very much for being as vulnerable and real as you have been today. You got my attention.
Well, I should say, you know, one of the things about my family, my brothers and sisters, is of my 4 siblings that are alcoholic addicts, 3 are in recovery and have been for years. My oldest sister is committed suicide, and that was, of course, sad and devastating. But to let you know about true redemption and true healing. My dad died in 2020 at the age of 93 of Parkinson's dementia. And for the last 6 years of his life, I had the privilege of caring for him, of loving him. At about the age of 65, where he was divorced for the second time and at was odds with pretty much every one of his kids, he finally came to the realization that he was the common denominator in all of that. And he made a 180 transformation, came to each of us and made reparation. So for the last 30 years of his life, I got to have a different dad. And the brother that sexually molested me, he and I have a sweet, kind, loving relationship. So when you ask me, who do I hope hears this? Don't give up. Every effort is worth the effort. The outcome for your own peace is worth the effort. Neither of those miracles did I ever think would happen as I began my journey to work, my journey for peace. Those are miracles I believe occurred because synergistically they were invited to occur. Will they occur for everyone? No, maybe not. But the peace that comes from within, you still get to have.
I love you. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. Frank, anything you want to add before I let this angel free?
The only thing I want to add is, personally, I think it's never too late. I think you said all the right things, but the only thing I think we talked to a lot of people, yourself included, who, you know, made these transitions and these changes somewhere in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s. And there might be somebody out there who's listening, who's in their 50s or in their 60s and thinking it's too late for me. If you got 10 years left, and even if it takes you 5 hard years to turn something in your life around, that still means you get to experience 5 more awesome years at the other end of that, right? And I mean, you know, Matthew, you made the comment about planting the trees and not going to be around to enjoy the shade that those trees produce, right? So no matter how much time you have left, there's always time, I think, to plant that tree for someone else. So again, regardless of how old you might be listening to this and where you are, and that you may not have even taken step one, but maybe today's podcast inspired you to take step one. As long as you got a breath left, right? That's why my favorite sport is baseball, right? It's not timed, right? As long as you got one out left, you can make any kind of comeback you want. So
that's right. 2 out rally.
That's it. I like her even more. Look at that.
See,
I'm married to a baseball player, and he's older than me, and he still plays baseball.
Well, we didn't really even touch on it, but I would encourage every single human being that has ever even thought about having a baby to start looking right now into the Love and Logic program. You can reach out to Keri, and we'll get this contact information there because she can be really influential in your life. Love and Logic comes into play for people who, like us, want to change and end generational cycles, and they want to do things differently, and they want to stop all the yelling and screaming and hitting, and they really want a different approach. I can say without question that it's the reason my children had a 180 childhood of mine, just in that space, just in the discipline space. And so I would encourage everybody to look into Love and Logic because it's been a complete game changer for me, my family, my kids, and everybody. I think that learns it usually comes away with a few nuggets going, yeah, I could do that. And so again, I just wanted to say we didn't get into that. We'll have you back and we'll talk about that another time because it really is fascinating. But Keri, unless you have anything you'd like to add as a final word, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I figured out why I got emotional. I got emotional because there's a guy who just a couple of years ago made the decision to just stop all this stuff that I've been seeing in my family forever. People like you are encouraging. That's where that came from.
Well, I'll just tell you one little story. I'm teaching a Love and Logic class, and my dad and his wife have come down to visit me. And my dad's never seen me teach Love and Logic. He had given me permission to share childhood stories about his harshness. And so he asked if he could come to class, and I'm kind of like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go because I'm going to talk about my dad. And about how hard it is. So he and Lorna come, and I'm talking about, growing up in this pretty abusive environment. And my dad is a history professor, so he's a professional teacher too. So I'm a little nervous about teaching in front of him. But anyway, he's sitting in my class and he doesn't say a word. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. But I just go with the flow. I'm like, whatever. I've taught so many classes by now that I know, I'm teaching it. And the class is really engaged. And I'm teaching how to shift from these automatic responses of like, seriously, are you kidding me? To seeing them as a person and imagine what it's like to be them in that situation. And then seek understanding, really engaging in how to engage in empathy, right? How to put yourself into empathy. And so when the class is over, we put chairs away and stuff like that. And we've got 2 cars there. And so my dad says, hey, can I ride back with you? And Hal can take Lorna home. And I'm like, sure, whatever. And so we're starting to drive home, and it's about a 20-minute drive. And my dad's kind of quiet. And I'm getting a little nervous because my dad's almost never quiet. Usually it's just some criticism, And I look over and I see that he's emotionally struggling. And I could count on 2 fingers the times I've seen my dad cry. And one of them was when he got kicked in the leg with a horse. So he's starting to tear up. And I go, yo, okay, Dad? And tears come down his face and he goes, I want to know if you'll do me a favor. And I go, okay, Dad. And he goes, at our family reunion this summer, will you teach that class?
Wow.
And I go, what do you mean? And he says, will you teach it to all the brothers and sisters? And I'm like, teach Love and Logic to my own brothers and sisters, Dad? I'm not sure they want to hear that from me. And then he really started to cry. And he said, I really want to leave a different legacy. Please, if I get permission from all of them, will you please teach it, Keri? Please. I'll pay for all the materials. And will you get all this stuff, like stuff you have with your students? He wanted a whole library for him. And I said, okay, Dad, if that's what you really want, And he did. He called, and back then, it was before my sister died, he called all 8 of them, and all of them said yes. So I got to teach Love and Logic geared specifically to our family dynamics. I got to use all the ones growing up.
Wow.
And he bought about $500 worth of materials.
Wow.
So if you want to talk about changing my family's life, all of them use Love and Logic. That's a fun story.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.